I work in a research station in northern Canada that has been monitoring climate change. For about 10 months out of the year, I live in what most would describe as a frozen hell. Personally, I enjoy it. The solitude is one of my favorite parts of the job. Being north of the Arctic Circle, neighbors aren't exactly close. Generally speaking, it's about a 6-hour plane ride to get into town. That's after you wait about 2 days for the pilot to receive the call, clear his schedule, fly out, land, rest, and fly back. Station 437 is about as remote as you can get within the Northern Hemisphere. After years of studying glacial recession, I had finally made an interesting discovery. A series of caves initially below the top of the ice had re-emerged to see the light of day for the first time in thousands of years. I had speculated about something like this, but I hadn't the opportunity to see it myself until now. This particular cave system was probably some 50,000 years old based on the progression of the glacier, possibly double that, and it was deep. My first foray into the environment had me stuck at the top of a several 100-foot drops, tossing glow sticks on a rope to test the depth. Liquid water was the surprise I was rewarded with. With water meant a chance for life. If a species could survive in this cave for so long while being isolated completely from the outside world, it had the potential to answer numerous scientific questions that have perplexed the academic community for years. I had the title of my paper envisioned in my head as I thought about how long it would take to get published. I had a slight sickening sensation as I stared down into the dark abyss below. I felt unsafe. And not only because I was looking down a drop of 300 feet or more. As I struggled to understand why something felt off, I felt a massive gust of wind at my back pushing me towards the edge. If not for my ice boots, I would have been going for a swim after a very tall high dive. I looked back towards the mouth of the cave and saw near whiteout conditions. My visit was cut short. The wind tore at my face as I rode my snowmobile back to the station, and by the time I got inside, the storm had intensified into the equivalent of Antarctic Condition 1 weather. For those unfamiliar with the term, it meant that I was to become a shut-in until conditions improved. The morning after the storm finally relented, a research assistant miraculously appeared at my door. Now, to put this into perspective, in the 8 years that I'd worked that research station, literally no one had managed to surprise me by showing up unannounced, not a single soul. Yet, here is this kid in his early 20s working on his dissertation who the university decided to send to me with no warning whatsoever. As it turned out, the university had tried to let me know, but apparently, that blizzard had managed to knock communications out for about 3 weeks. I wasn't happy with it, but I decided to be flexible. It was only supposed to be for a few months anyway. His name was Machitu, which apparently meant something in Algonquin. He preferred Matthew or Matt for short. To say that this kid was an oddball would be the understatement of the millennium. Generally speaking, when something happened at night, it was animal activity outside and I had to investigate to prevent damage to the station. Around midnight the same day Matt arrived, I woke to an odd scraping sound. I quickly grabbed my handgun and made sure, out of habit, that it was loaded. Nothing's more useless against a charging bear or moose than an empty handgun that's empty from the last time you faced a charging bear or moose. As I stepped out my door, it quickly became apparent that the noise was coming from inside the facility. Once I got out into the kitchen area, I saw Matt quickly shove whatever he was doing back into his bag and turn to face me as he dropped something into the sink. There was a peculiar smell in the air. It seemed familiar but was something I hadn't smelled in a very long time. At first, I couldn't identify it. but after a second I realized it was the smell of meat. Fresh meat. I hadn't had meat, especially fresh, since I had to kill a bull moose that decided to charge me instead of running off. He was delicious. I couldn't directly quiz Matt on it, as we both knew that there was plenty of other food on site, albeit mostly dehydrated, but there are things I would have done for a nice, fresh, bone-in ribeye that would have made a sailor blush. At any rate, I left the kitchen without saying so much as a word. His stash was his own. The next few weeks I kept getting the odd feeling that something more was off about Matt. I found him a day later sitting in the common area with all of the lights off. When I first saw him, his back was to me. He was sitting upright, and started to lie down, but kept getting back up very quickly. It looked like some sort of disturbing, high-speed, sit-up. When I flicked the lights on, I was startled to see that he was indeed facing me rather than away. Unless I was seeing things wrong, he was basically folding himself back onto his legs. He also wasn't out of breath at all. If I did sit-ups at that speed, I'd be sucking down oxygen as quickly as I could get it into my lungs. I tried to just mentally write it off, but I couldn't get over the image of him facing me, or away, and moving like that. It just seemed unnatural. It creeped me out, but there really wasn't much I could do about it other than let the university know that he was acting weird. Upon returning to the station one evening after a day spent trying to map the cave, I discovered that my fuel reserve was about half an inch lower than it was when I left. There were really only a few things that consumed fuel in the camp: the snowmobile, our emergency space heater, emergency generator, and a few backup stoves. Almost everything else ran off of batteries that charged themselves via solar panels. During the dark months of the year, I would supplement them with fuel to ensure that they lasted the winter. I generally had more than enough fuel on site, but ensuring that I lasted the winter when the solar panels weren't able to generate enough power was one of my top priorities. I couldn't figure out how I'd missed such a fuel drop. Half an inch was probably 2 gallons of fuel from the barrel. Not exactly a small amount. A few days later I was again out on the glacier, finally about to attempt to climb down into the abyss, when I saw smoke coming from the direction of camp. I hopped on the snowmobile and hightailed it home. When I got there, I found nothing. No evidence of fire, no smoke or anything. I could still sort of smell smoke, and the meat smell, but I couldn't find the location. The snow was easily several feet deep at any given location, so I quickly rationed out that Matt could have smothered the fire, and covered the location quickly enough that I wouldn't be able to locate it. I bugged him about it, and he replied that he was cold, so he made a fire and covered it in snow when he was done. It was a very terse reply, and I informed him that he wasn't to use our fuel reserve for anything ever. It was my decision as I ran the camp. I reported him to the university that night and got a somewhat strange reply. They informed me that Matt's family had grown apart from their son while he was stationed abroad. This didn't really surprise me, but what did surprise me was that he hadn't once made an outgoing call or any sort of outgoing correspondence at all since prior to his arrival at the station. At that point, I requested that he be removed. While the performance of his duties was satisfactory, his demeanor was not indicative of someone who would be able to stay long-term in this sort of environment. The university agreed and sent a plane to retrieve him 3 days later. Things then returned to normal. For the most part. It seemed that I couldn't get the smell of, now rotten, meat out of the building. I sprayed aerosol for it and even left the door open in winds that approached 40 miles per hour. Nothing seemed to take the smell away. Finally, 2 days after Matt left, I found the culprit. There was a piece of decaying meat about 4 inches long by 1 or 2 inches wide sticking to the underside of one of the counters. It had been nailed there. This was absolutely perplexing, but I quickly removed the nail and discarded the meat. As time drew on, I found several more pieces of meat nailed to things. One, in particular, was attached to my snowmobile. I located this when I found a medium-sized brown bear snooping around my vehicle after I finished storing a new core sample in the ice barn. Rather than having to shoot it, I was able to scare it off. This is pretty unusual as bears tend to find meat irresistible most of the year. I've been chased off by more than a few bears when I saw that they had a kill in front of them. This meat seemed fresher. Perhaps the weather outside had kept it in better condition? Freezing temperatures tended to do that. That night, as the weather began to turn foul again, I received a call from the university. Matt's plane had gone missing. He never made it back to town. They had organized a search but wanted me to join in the morning provided I had safe weather conditions. I knew the pilot who was flying Matt personally, so I wasn't about to let the weather get in the way, but -10 and dropping with full whiteout conditions kept me inside for several hours after the sun rose. Once I finally made it outside, I hauled as quickly as I could in the direction of the plane's flight path. This happened to take me past our own small landing field and towards the glacier and would eventually take me right past the cave. As I climbed the glacier and headed in the direction of the cave, I saw someone walking towards me. It looked like Matt. It was wearing the same cold weather gear that Matt wore, and it was about his size, but it had a limp. As I drove quickly towards it, I had a few thoughts. It had been over a week since Matt had flown out. If his plane had gone down, even if he survived the initial crash, there was a very high chance that he wouldn't have survived a week in the wilderness, especially in these frigid temperatures. I slowed the snowmobile down considerably, and suddenly I saw it lurch towards me. I was maybe a few hundred yards from it when it took off full speed with a loping, slightly uneven gait that can only be described as inhuman. I turned around so quickly I made myself dizzy, and the acceleration nearly threw me from my snowmobile. Looking back, I could see that Matt suddenly seemed quite a bit taller, approaching 10 feet in height, and suddenly had knees that bent in the wrong direction. His gear was rapidly changing from the colors I recognized into a brown sort of fur that covered the entire upper portion, save the feet, of whatever was chasing me. As I covered the miles between the glacier and the station, I realized that the blizzard had struck back full force. Not exactly how I'd hoped spring would sprung, but at least it seemed to slow down the monstrosity chasing me. Once I passed the runway, I lost sight of it. Apparently, 60 miles per hour in 4 feet of snow was a bit much for it. I eased up a little, not a lot, once the base came into sight, and that was only so I wouldn't hit it. Once inside, I tried to phone the university, but all communications were down. I had no internet, no phone, basically nothing. This had happened on stormy occasions in the past, but it usually took a week or so to restore. The wind howled, and based on the mini weather station, half a foot of snow had fallen already. With wind speeds of 60 plus, I knew there'd be drifts of 8 or 10 feet right outside my door once everything died down. After resigning myself to a very unsettling night, I stayed locked in the innermost room of the facility with my handgun under my pillow while I slept. The following morning had the winds below 30, and the precipitation had slowed for the moment. The winds had blown the snow all around the base, leaving areas that had 3 feet initially with only a few inches, and areas that were almost bare ground prior suddenly had 10 feet. Walking towards the fuel reserve, I noticed a black spot in the snow. It was a large charred area, about 10 feet in diameter. In the center was a mostly burned body. Nothing was easily visible until I rounded the other side and I could clearly see it was Matt's blue coat. The one he wore on the day that I met him for the first time. It was the same coat that he wore when he started a fire while I was out getting ready to explore the deeper part of the cave, and the same coat that I saw transform into grey-brown fur on a 10-foot-tall demon thing as it chased me off of the glacier. Once I had the generator fired up, I once again locked myself inside, the wind picking up again shortly thereafter. Then, as if things weren't bad enough, I heard a loud bang, followed by a second. I moved closer to the protected exterior window in an attempt to see something but jumped back as another loud thud shook the facility, originating on the other side of the window. I tried to get a good look at it, but as I did, it moved so quickly that it actually seemed to blur my vision, almost like it was twitching back and forth rapidly. I've tried to contact the university again, and I've requested a pilot, but nothing will go through. I have the out-of-station response set to an emergency, and I'm monitoring the computer day and night. The blizzard hasn't let up yet, and it's been almost a week. The pounding hasn't let up either. I hope someone receives this soon. From a very early age, I was always told to lock my bedroom door. It was for my own safety, my foster mother would say. This woman seemed so frightened that I deemed it unwise to question her pleas. My nightly routine consisted of brushing my teeth, gargling, spitting, whispering good night, and spinning the heavy latch into place. Hearing that satisfying echo of steel gave me a profound sense of security. Before skipping off to bed, I would watch the blurry vision of Mother through the door window. Sometimes I would outline a heart in the foggy glass and spot my mother's thoughtful frown. That blurry outline of a face watched me until I fell asleep. In the morning I would turn on my reading light and dive into the adventures of Tommy and Sick Boy. The story was the same every time, two boys exploring a pirate's cove and eventually fighting against Black Eye's gang of bandits in order to rescue a beautiful princess and unearth a vast supply of hidden treasure. I loved how the story never changed. I could always rely on Tommy shooting Black Eye in the heart, Sick Boy kissing the princess, and the gang stumbling upon where X marks the spot. Then Mother would open the door and say, "It's safe to come out now, Isabella." One day my mother was taken by a man in a dark uniform. Her arms reached for me, but I was so distant. The man reeked of sweat and his mouth never stopped chewing. They kept asking me if I was okay, like I had been injured. I only responded with one question: where is my mother? They kept asking silly questions. Did my foster mother ever abuse me in any way? Was I exposed to any violence in the household? How long did she keep me in the confined space? How many this? How many that? I just wanted to see my mother. The men in uniform only scratched their beards and offered me water. They treated me horribly. This is what Tommy and Sick Boy felt like when they were captured. Afraid, and vulnerable. The questioning stopped. When it came time to sleep, I requested that I sleep in one of those barred rooms they keep for bad people. I needed it for protection. It was not safe to not have a lock on my bedroom door. The scary men refused. Instead, I was brought to another foster home. Blue and red lights danced in the late night air. I kicked and screamed as they dragged me out of the back seat. A woman greeted the men and she took my hand. This hand wasn't the mother's hand, but it was warm and gentle. I agreed to stay. This woman made me fresh chocolate chip cookies. She let me stay up late watching cartoons. She spoke very softly, gentle, like an angel. She braided my hair. described in blushing detail how gorgeous I was. She read me bedtime stories. Stories filled with adventure, just like the storybook I had, A Mother's Place. Best of all, I finally had brothers and sisters, a dream come true. I couldn't wait to tell Mother when I saw her again. And just like every night, I locked my bedroom door. A small flick of the wrist. A satisfying click, and I was safe from all danger. I slept for a very long time. A peaceful, deep, and dreamless sleep. I awoke, to my surprise, looking up at the sky. I should have been afraid because I had no idea of where I was, but I was happy. Snow covered my skin, but I wasn't cold. I remember giggling at the sight of my breath in the chilly wind. The backyard was silent. A crow cried out in the distance. Branches swayed. Sunlight reflected off of the winter frost. I felt so happy. Happier than I've ever been before. I couldn't help myself from giggling and dancing. Singing and twirling with my arms swinging by my side. I stopped dancing when I heard a woman's scream. The scream echoed from the front of the house. Birds flew away in fear. I stood still, not knowing what to do. Was that my mother's scream? I quickly ran around to the driveway steps. Climbing the hill to the front door, I saw those blue and red lights again, and the men in uniform. I was no longer happy. I was afraid. Bravely, just like Tommy facing Black Eye, I reached the front door, ready for them to grab me again. Ready to fight back. The woman screamed once more when she saw me. Her watery eyes were so horrifying. The towel that rested on her shoulder was covered in blood. Just like the towels that covered the boys, as they slept on the driveway. Something had happened. Something horrible had happened here. I wanted to comfort this woman, tell her everything was okay, just like Mother comforted me. The closer I got, the more she screamed. Suddenly the men in uniform picked me up and threw me into the back seat. I wailed and kicked at them. They were taking me away again. Why was this happening to me? I didn't do anything wrong. I just wanted safety. I wanted a family. I wanted my mother. All the way back the men wouldn't say a word, and the one with the chewing mouth never took his scary eyes off of me. Once again they questioned me. The questions were very silly. Do you remember breaking down your door? No. Do you remember making loud noises in the night? No. Do you remember attacking your brothers? No. Do you remember standing at the foot of your mother's bed, watching her? No. Why are you covered in blood? Do you remember attacking them? Why are you covered in blood? Where did you go in the night? Why are you covered in your brother's blood? What do you remember? I remember waking up in a field and feeling alive. I felt beautiful. Then I heard a scream, and now I'm scared because I think I did something awful. I think I might have done something terrible. I just want to be safe. The men made sure I slept in a very nice room. It was so nice and wonderful. It reminded me so much of my original bedroom that I cried when I went to reach for my adventure book. Every night I perform my routine, gargling, spitting, whispering goodnight to my room, and drawing pictures of my mother in this notebook. She would love to know that my door is almost always locked and that I feel very safe. There is a man that walks up and down the hall. His keys rattle when he gets close. I can see a shadow of his face in the door window, and he watches me until I fall asleep. Hello, my scary friends. This is another werewolf horror story. Rough day. Heather smiled at me as I walked into the kitchen. Yeah? Paulson wouldn't get off my back about the new account. I tried to tell him. I began, but she walked over and kissed me. You remember the rule. No work at home. I sighed and kissed her back. You're the boss. I started walking up the stairs when I heard her call behind me. You want frozen pizza? Sure. Anything. I don't care. After I had changed, I walked back downstairs. Heather was standing by the kitchen table, holding a DVD case. Jennifer gave me this at work today. Said it was a really good movie. Wanna watch it? She asked, handing it over. I looked at the box art. It showed what looked like a stock image of a werewolf leaping through a star-filled sky towards the world's most uninterested model lying prone on a clip-art hill. Attack of the Werewolf announced the title in red chiller font with the names of several actors I had never heard of. I laughed. Where'd she get this? The 99-cent spin at Goodwill. Heather snatched it away. I don't know and I don't care. You've had a hard day, I've had a hard day, and we both need something to take our minds off things. She waved the case around. What better way than watching this piece of garbage for? She checked the back. 82 minutes? You're right, I said. Did you put the pizza in? After the pizza had been cooking for a while, we sat down on the couch and popped the movie in. A Christopher Lee wannabe began with a heavy-handed explanation of what we were about to see. A group of students will explore this abandoned mansion. Oh no, there's a werewolf. Blah blah blah. You get the picture. The movie ended up being not the campy fun we were expecting, but an absolute mess where everyone involved took themselves way too seriously. We both ended up dozing off. I awoke to a burning smell. Opening my eyes, I saw black smoke pouring down the hall from the kitchen. Throwing open the door, I saw our pizza, burnt to a crisp from being in the oven for far too long. I cleaned up the mess and opened some windows to air the kitchen out. I walked back out into the living room and saw that Heather was still asleep. Looking at the screen, I saw one of the actresses walking through a deserted hallway in the mansion, walls of windows on either side, an apprehensive look on her face. Dinner was ruined, but I was still hungry. I kissed her on the cheek and went into the kitchen. I made sure to close the windows. Hopefully, she would never know. Searching through the cupboards, I found a half-empty box of microwave popcorn. It would have to do. I set the popcorn inside and turned on the microwave. From the direction of the living room came the sound of shattering glass. There was a loud scream, followed by an inhuman shriek. The screams died away, followed by the disgusting slurping noises of prey being devoured. There were howl and another shattering of glass. The popcorn finished. I poured it into a bowl and walked back into the living room. A cool breeze hit me in the face and I stepped in something wet and thick. There was glass covering the carpet. Looking at the couch, I dropped the bowl, sending it crashing to the floor. I had left the movie on mute. Well, writing about that last case did help me out a lot. I've decided to post a more intense one. That last case doesn't haunt me too badly, but this one does. Once again, all names are either changed or withheld. I had been dispatched to the scene of a triple murder and abduction. Both the front and the back door had been broken down, so there were likely multiple assailants. Or one assailant trying to make us think that. The crime likely occurred in the last few days but had been discovered earlier in the day. I operated in a pretty isolated area of the country, so neighbors could be far away. It's not surprising it took a few days. I drove to the scene with my partner, Ben, not his real name. The place was already swarming with police when we arrived. Yellow crime scene tape surrounded the house. Many of the police looked horribly shaken up. As I parked the car, I realized I had been at this house a couple of months ago. There had been a rush of livestock and pet killings in the last 2 or so years, along with consists about prowlers. For those who don't know, that's basically a fancy way of saying a trespasser. With my memory jogged, I remembered that this was the home of the Johnston family. They were a family of 4, with a teenage daughter and younger son. "Hope you guys have strong stomachs," one of the detectives said grimly as I approached the doorway. Now, I've seen things as a cop. I've seen murder scenes. I've seen bodies crushed in fatal crashes. I've seen suicides. I've seen overdoses. Nothing I had seen, not even the previous case I told you guys about, could prepare me for this. There were 2 dead bodies in view as soon as I entered. The father, Mr. Johnston, was the lucky one. He had been killed with a shotgun blast to the head. Blood and brain matter caked the floor around him. It was a revolting sight, but I could handle that. The other 2 bodies were more distressing. The daughter looked as if she had been mauled by an animal. Her face had been torn to ribbons by what must have been clawing. Her left arm was torn off and her throat had been torn out. Blood was everywhere around her body. "Jesus," I said. But there was still one more body in the bedroom. The bedroom door had been destroyed, so Mrs. Johnston must have tried to barricade herself in the bedroom but to no avail. She had suffered the worst fate of the 3. There was a massive hole in each of her shoulders as if massive claws had impaled them and held her down. Her face and throat had also been shredded. In fact, she had nearly been decapitated. But that wasn't the worst part. There was horrible bruising and evidence of trauma around the nether regions. Don't make me elaborate on that, please. She had been violated. There were a few large, coarse red hairs on the floor in the bedroom. None of the Johnstons were redheads, so this was considered an important clue. The son was nowhere to be found. At least there was a chance he was still alive. Someone, or something, this malevolent probably wouldn't be very merciful though. We were all confounded. The Johnston family had no known enemies. But this kind of cases is why my profession exists. It immediately became the top priority to locate the missing child, and bring the killer, to justice. We collected as much evidence as possible and looked at facts of the past to build a case. The forensic testing confused us more than it helped us. The hairs I mentioned, as well as semen samples, you know where that is from, please don't make me repeat it, were not human. Instead, they belonged to some kind of unidentified wolf species. At least, they matched canine DNA most closely. This had to be an error, but repeated testing affirmed it. This baffled and disgusted us all, and we did not make it public. The other facet I looked at was recent events in our area. As I said, there had been a lot of pets and livestock killed by a wild animal of some sort in the last couple of years. But there was also a similar murder. A young couple had been attacked at a secluded lover's lane. The woman had been lucky enough to escape, but her lover wasn't. A rustling in the woods had prompted the man to get out of the car and investigate. Believe it or not, I've noticed people have a tendency to leave the safety of their car when threatened, despite the protests of the woman. Shortly after he crossed the tree line, something pounced on him. In her fear, she drove away, leaving him. The man's remains were found a few days later. The maulings we encountered at the recent crime brought back memories of that case, but it was of little help. I also mentioned that there had been a previous incident at the Johnston house. About a month before the murders, the Johnston boy had been staring out of his window one night, when he was supposed to be asleep. He saw something. A large red-haired beast crouched down over something. The thing noticed the boy watching, and proceeded to stand up on two legs. It pointed at him with one of its arms, front legs. Before making a SHHH with the same limb. It then dragged its massive paw across its throat, making that universally recognized sign of death. At that point, the boy screamed. He told his parents what he saw, but the thing was gone. As is expected, they assumed it was simply a nightmare. That explanation got harder to defend the next day when the Johnstons found their dog mutilated in the backyard. It was in the same area that the boy claimed to have seen the creature. Faced with this, the parents concluded it was probably a bear or other large animal. Police did get a report about this, but there wasn't much to do. We just added to the list of the animal killings. But the boy continued to insist on what he saw that night, telling his classmates about it in school. I know this because one of the other officers had a son in the same class, and he told us about the story. Was it possible someone or something had to silence the boy because of what he witnessed? Unfortunately, we had no solid leads or suspects. Although the case facts we had were intriguing and strange, we had more questions than when we started the investigation. Over a year passed, and we had not located the missing boy. With no human DNA or suspects, it became a cold case. But 2 years after the killings, we got a break. A man had pawned an item taken from the Johnston house. You'd better believe we swarmed on this. Soon, we had a person of interest, a man named David Kimber. We didn't know for sure that he was our guy, so we had to be careful with this lead. Ben and I did set out to talk to him. We went to his house in the day, not wanting to deal with this possibly dangerous individual at night. David Kimber was a very large man, probably about 6 feet 5 inches and very muscular, with fire red hair. I immediately hoped he couldn't resist, as I doubted that my partner and I could handle him. He was surprised to see us but was amicable enough. He readily agreed to go down to the station with us for questioning but said he needed to put shoes on first. We waited for what felt like forever before deciding he wasn't coming. A quick lap around the house showed the back door open. He had fled. We cursed this but also knew this gave us a viable suspect. We'd get him, Ben assured me. With the evidence we had, the pawned item and his flight from us, we were able to get a search warrant. A search yielded a smoking gun for us, a shotgun that would later prove to have been used in the murder of Mr. Johnston. Ballistic testing confirmed this. We had a definitive suspect, and the paper went wild with the new developments. This is how I got the next lead in this nightmare. We had no idea where our suspect was, but locating him was our priority. That's where the next lead comes in. A couple of weeks after the search, I was told a man had information about the suspect that could help. It was an older man, who gave off a real outdoorsy vibe. I welcomed him into my office and got ready. You're probably going to think I'm crazy, but I have to try to help. The man said. Go on, I encouraged, I'm open-minded. I was too, after the previous case I mentioned. David is very dangerous, and he isn't entirely human. The man said slowly. I know that sounds crazy, but you've got to believe me. I just indicated for him to continue. He had a clan of goddamn monsters back in my town. A wife and 3 abominable children. His wife and eldest son were human, but the other 2 kids were like him. Those bastards killed a couple dozen people in less than a year. The man said. It was clear he was getting angry remembering it. I just remained neutral. I and a few other townsfolk found their hideout. That house was a Channel house when we finished. We put an end to his wife and bastard children. But David got away. The man spat. Thank you. There are certainly some anomalies here that give credence to your story. But do you have any leads to follow up on forgetting him? I asked. He thought a little bit before responding to my question. You could try going to his hometown, redacted. His father lives out there. He's not a bad man. The man replied. I told a sanitized version of this to my superiors, and they agreed it couldn't hurt to talk to Kimber's family. I set out with Ben to investigate this lead, and during this time I confided in him the possibility of something supernatural. Given some facts in the case, he reluctantly kept an open mind. To my surprise, Kimber's father was more than willing to cooperate and let us in immediately. Mr. Kimber, I said as gently as I could, we need to talk to you about your son, David. At that, he broke down crying. I know he's not right. It's not him anymore. He has been completely purged of his humanity. And it's my fault. The older Kimber bemoaned. I'm guessing you know his nature then? Ben asked. Mr. Kimber nodded, regaining his composure. There are men who shift their shape and change their skin in some conditions, he continued. Werewolf? I hesitantly asked. Close, he replied, not all of the Hollywood mythos is true. Yes, this condition exists. But it is not exclusive to the full moon. At first, it is. But not with maturity. With this condition, your body is at war. Your humanity versus your feral side. With David, the feral side won, he said sadly, before resuming. Once you mature, the transformation changes. One can change form at will, and revert at will too. You can also prevent yourself from turning during a full moon. You only change if you wish. You also retain your sentience in beast form. You can understand language, think as clearly, use hand signals, etc. If humanity wins the war, you'll live a normal life. But should the feral side win, you will have an evil being. An immature skin changer will be like a wild animal. But a feral, mature one is a sentient being with a human cunning that kills for joy, capable of vile acts such as torture and rape while in beast form. A much greater threat. And David is that? I asked cautiously. Yes, and it's my fault. I was so concerned about concealing my condition from others that I never considered the possibility that it is hereditary. Years ago, I was bitten by a beast while hunting. When I shot it and killed it, a person lay in its place. After that, my struggle began. Every full moon, I pretended to go hunting, but really chained myself in the woods. It worked because one night I fought off the transformation. I'm a rarity. Most die from the bite or get killed in the immature phase. Others end their own lives in despair. Most of us die before the age of 30. I'm almost 70, probably one of the oldest of my kind to ever live. What happened to David? Ben asked. He inherited the condition, he sighed. David didn't know I had it and tried to hide it. With no mentor, the feral side won. He transformed involuntarily and killed 2 friends on a camping trip when he was a teen. Officially, the story is that an animal attacked the camp and only David escaped. Anyway, once you taste flesh in the immature phase, humanity has virtually no chance of winning the fight. He changed. He became a monster and ran away. He's wreaked havoc ever since. Mr. Kimber said sadly. I know this is difficult, but do you know where he is? I asked. Yes. He is in the woods hunting right now. Behind this house. I can't kill my own son, but I cannot excuse everything he has done and will do. Do what you must do, he said solemnly. After more talking, Mr. Kimber agreed to aid us in tracking him. He changed forms to do so, saying he would have a better smell. The transformation was quite a sight. In beast form, his hair was white and several of his teeth were missing, just like his human form. The transformed man waved a massive arm forward as a signal to follow. He led us into the woods until we heard a crunching sound. Ahead, in the clearing, was a massive beast eating the body of a slain deer. This one was bigger than the old man and had red hair. No doubt it was David. It roared loudly before running at us. I was frozen and wide-eyed at the charging behemoth. Luckily, the elder Kimber wasn't. The white-haired beast intercepted the red one. Ben and I took the chance to get a few feet apart and draw our guns. The clash between father and son was short. The elderly Kimber was smaller and older, and fought defensively, not wanting to kill his son. David had no such reservations. And after the father had staggered David with swats a couple of times, the younger Kimber had pinned him down and shredded him. At that point, I opened fire, striking the red beast twice in the torso. Before he could commit to charging me, Ben started shooting too. He was a better shot than me and landed a face shot. The beast shrieked in rage, contemplating an attack angle before retreating a few feet. It grabbed the deer carcass and hurled it at me. I was struck in the torso by the carcass. I was winded and knocked to the ground. During this time I heard more roaring and gunshots. As I found the strength to lift the carcass, I heard Ben scream, followed by gunshots and an agonized roar. I got up in time to see the red beast collapse, riddled with bullet holes. In a few seconds, it had reverted to human form. Laying before us was the dead body of our human suspect. To our surprise, the elder Kimber stirred. Back in human form, his face and chest were bloodied badly. But he would live. He still fell to his knees, gazing sadly at his son's body. Officially, the narrative is hokey in places. Official accounts say that David attacked the Johnston family with an attack dog. We all know it's bogus, but we've never publicized the more corporeal aspects of the animal attack. The narrative says we tracked David down, and he was shot-killed when he tried to kill his, half true at least. We never found the missing boy, but he is presumed dead. The elder Kimber did indeed live and is not in the official narrative. He did claim David's body though and held what I presume was a private memorial of the sort. But this case may not be over. After it was closed, Ben abruptly resigned. Before leaving, he told me the truth. He had been bitten during the final showdown. He told me he was going to ask the older Kimber to help him preserve his humanity. This case cost me a lot of my soul, but it may have cost my partner even more.